I think at this stage it's probably more likely than not. From Canada's point of view, this is gun-to-your-head trade policy. The stakes of not doing a deal at the moment are pretty high. They're potentially looking at being thrown out of NAFTA, reverting to an 80s trade deal, the Canada-US free trade agreement.
Right.
It's not really in their interests. A bad deal is better than a no deal.
How revolutionary is this deal? Because now, as I'm looking at the analysts who are pulling this deal apart, they're actually saying a lot of it looks very similar to the old NAFTA agreement. So has President Trump effectively done what successive presidents have done who've tried to renegotiate this? They've tried to renegotiate it, and what they've ended up with looks pretty similar to what they started with.
Well, I think it's fair to say he hasn't reinvented the wheel with this one. There are a few challenges for automakers, for example. He's raised the North American content requirement. That's the amount of a car that has to be North American in order to qualify for zero tariffs. Not the most sexy thing in the world, but I think the bigger implication is really politically. First of all, going into the midterms, he's got this political win. I think there's, it's obviously going to be a potentially big deal for some Democrat voters or those swing voters. There's also an added a condition which means that 40% of those auto imports have to come from content that was made by workers $16 an hour. That's a big deal for unions.
Yeah, but that's what I wanted to say about that. That doesn't seem to be a big deal for Canada, but given that a Canadian worker already gets paid what, $20, $28 an hour. Yeah. This is only really going to have a big impact on the Mexicans, isn't it, rather than the Canadians?
I mean, I think this is mainly about Mexican cheap labour, which a lot of Trump supporters and potential Trump supporters, feel really aggrieved by. There are a couple of things that could upset the, Canadians on the dairy side.
Yeah, just tell us about the dairy side, because, I mean, it's been mentioned a lot. What are the specifics there?
It's really about the supply management system in Canada. There's actually, I think, potentially the bigger issue is this Chapter 19, which again doesn't sound very sexy, but it's about the way that anti-dumping laws are governed between Canada and the US specifically. That was taken out the fact sheet that the US trade representative presented to the press. So that could actually be a bigger issue. But again, these are only guidelines. They could come back into negotiations over the next 30 days before that big deadline in a month's time.
So we get a deal. What about ratification by US politicians as well? I've already seen some noises from some Republicans who are very unhappy about aspects of the deal already.
Well, again, I come back to this issue, which is this is gun-to-your-head trade policy. The alternatives at this stage are simply so high. President Trump has basically shown that he's credible about ripping up trade deals, about imposing big tariffs on countries if he doesn't get his way. And actually, this appeases some pro-trade guys who want any kind of deal, and it also appeals to some of the unions and the Democrats who appreciate this kind of higher wage conditions in there as well.
But Michael, whose head is Donald Trump holding the gun to? Because it's not beyond worth noting that 36 of 50 states, their top export market is Canada. And of the rest of the states, which it isn't Canada, it's Mexico. So it's almost like the president's holding the gun to his own head, because if this deal isn't done, it's all these states that export to Canada and Mexico that will be impacted.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that's one of the kind of games that he's repeatedly played throughout the last year when trade policy's become an issue. But so far, it's kind of, you could argue, at least in this case, it's potentially worked. I mean, I think the bigger issue here is what this means for how do we view this, view other trade tensions, having seen the way that he's dealt with Canada and Mexico. There's a temptation to see the deal maker here, see the guy that just wants to get anything done. He's not that bothered. For us, I think this actually frees up some space to go after the region that he really cares about, and that's China.
Hey everybody, it's Hadley Gamble from our new CNBC Middle East Bureau in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for stopping by. Now to watch more, you can try one of the videos that just popped up on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe.